I see. Thanks to the. Yes. Yeah. Now. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to those of you here at IDS. Welcome to our quite sizable audience online. Delighted to have you all with us. My name is John Gaventa. I'm a fellow here at the Institute of Development Studies, and today I'm here in the role as editor-in-chief of our IDS Bulletin, the journal which has been in continuous publication now for 58 years. The Bulletin publishes special issues on a variety of themes in development. It holds a special role in linking work across research, policy, practice. It's fully open access. It's widely downloaded and used. But we're delighted today to launch this very special issue. We publish special issues. This is a very special issue entitled Building Disability Inclusive Futures. I say very special for several reasons. First, as the introduction to this editor for the Bulletin points out, while the Bulletin has been in continuous publication for almost 60 years, to our knowledge, this is the first issue dedicated to the important theme of disability and development. That's an oversight on our part. This issue is long overdue. Thank you to the editors and the writers for helping to fill that gap. This gap in our work reflects a bigger gap, one which the Bulletin also helps to fill. As the editors point out, in terms of research, historically, disability studies and development studies have paid little attention to each other, despite their relevance to one another. An estimated 1.3 billion people in the world experience significant disability, the equivalent of 16% of the world's population. So any inclusive notion of global development simply must include the voices, knowledges, and experiences of those people with disabilities. Third, this issue is significant because it represents a true transdisciplinary partnership, bringing together representatives of organizations of people with disabilities, with other academics, practitioners, donors, policymakers in the field. The issue itself represents a collaboration between IDS and the Disability Inclusive Development Program, DID, a large coalition of organizations working on disability over the last 10 years, with important significant funding from the UK government. So on behalf of IDS, I just want to say a quick thanks to those who have led this consortium, and particularly those who have helped to edit this important issue. To Claire Walsh of Sightsavers International, who I believe is online with us, to Gayatri Sekar of the International Disability Alliance, as well as to Stephen Thompson and Brigitte Rohwerder from here at IDS. Thanks also to the over 40 contributors to this contribution, to this issue. You've produced a wonderfully rich collection of insights from diverse populations, from diverse points of view across North and South. I don't recall in our issues of IDS, I don't recall a single issue that's had so many contributors, over 40 for mere 5 or 6, 8 or 9 articles, which offer such a powerful combination of research, practitioner knowledge, and the wisdom of lived experience. So today we'll have the opportunity to hear from several of these authors and editors. These include Stephen Thompson, who will introduce the Bulletin more in a minute, Elizabeth Ogutu, who will share thoughts on stigma and disability, Brigitte, who will talk about participatory methods for researching disability, Claire Walsh on themes of safeguarding, and Gayatri Sekar on the leadership in development of organizations of people with disability. And I'll introduce each speaker a bit further when we move to their paper. Each speaker will have approximately 8 minutes. I'll do my best to keep us on time. And there's also then an opportunity for discussion in the room and those of you online. If those of you online have questions or comment, please use either the comment function or the Q&A function, and we'll try to bring as many of those in towards the end of the session as we can. So welcome again. Before going on to these speakers, we're also delighted to be joined by Kemi Williams. Kemi's the head of Gender Equalities and the head of the Gender Equalities and Rights Department for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. Perhaps more importantly, Kemi is a graduate of IDS and was in the Gender and Development 2003 program, in 89 program. And she's coming back today to be with us at IDS for the first time in many years. So Kemi, thanks very much. And thanks for the contribution of FCDO, both for this bulletin, but for all this important research program over the last decade that's involved so many partners. Kemi, please.
Thank you, John. It's really great to be back. It's hasn't changed much. But the sun is shining, which is fantastic. No, I have very, very fond memories of being here. Good afternoon, everyone. Real pleasure to join you here today at this special IDS Bulletin on Disability Inclusive Development. It's also a personal pleasure, as John has mentioned, to return to IDS as an alumnus. I did MA3 in Gender and Development many years ago, and currently head up the Gender Equality and Rights Department at the FCDO. So it's a long circle, and there's been many things in between. But it's great to be back because this place has truly shaped my only thinking about development and gender equality and continues to influence my work today. As John has said, today's event marks an important milestone. It's the first IDS Bulletin dedicated to disability inclusive development. And it comes at a pivotal time, I think, in the Disability Inclusive Development Programme, including the Inclusive Futures and PENDA Consortia, which reach their conclusion later this year. It's therefore more than just a collection of articles. It represents the depth of learning, evidence and collaboration that have defined this programme. Academics, practitioners, advocates, and organisations of people living with disability representatives have all contributed to this bulletin, embodying the partnership model of the DID programme. Since the programme began in 2018, the landscape of disability inclusive development has evolved significantly. In fact, our world has evolved in many ways. And many of you here in person and online, and I'm hoping that includes my predecessor, Diana Dalton, who really should be here instead of me, because this was something that she very much embodied and worked on and held close. I really hope she's online. She's currently working for the FCDO in Kenya. I really hope that all of that partnership and all of those stakeholders will remember the momentum that's been created, in fact, by the Global Disability Summit that was held in London in, I think, 2018, when the then Secretary of State announced this ambitious programme. So 8 years on, that commitment has delivered real, tangible change. We've had the privilege of working with some of the most knowledgeable and experienced practitioners in the sector. The expertise within the wide network of delivery partners has been central to the programme's success. Equally vital has been the dedication of programme staff, researchers and project teams in every country where DID has been active. Above all, I want to recognise the organisations of persons with disabilities who've been involved. OPDs have been the programme's conscience and its compass. They have kept us aligned with the principle of nothing about us without us, and ensured that the programme remains grounded in the priorities of people with disabilities. Their leadership from village groups in northern Tanzania, encouraging school enrolment, to technical help desks advising municipalities in Nepal, shows what genuine partnership looks like. The impact of the programme is both broad and multi-layered. Inclusive Futures projects have supported almost 30,000 people with disabilities to access education, healthcare, and livelihoods. We hope each of those individuals has seen real improvements that open new opportunities and enable greater participation in their communities. But the achievements go far beyond direct support. DID has driven systems change, from commitments to collect disability data on every new school enrolment, to local and national governments committing almost £10 million of investment in education and health services for people with disabilities. And it has tackled stigma and discrimination at scale, with initiatives such as radio dramas in Nigeria, reaching over 19 million people and shifting public attitudes. Research and evidence have been the backbone of this progress. Between Inclusive Futures, Penda, and the Disability Help Desk, the programme has generated over 200 learning papers and more than 250 query responses. Together, they have contributed significantly to the global evidence base for disability inclusive development and provided policymakers with the insights needed to drive reform. That's why today's bulletin is so important. It showcases rigorous research and highlights the value of evidence for shaping future priorities. It has a record of what's been achieved and a resource for what must come next. Because while the DID programme is drawing to a close, the journey genuinely towards inclusive development is only just beginning. The work you've done has created a foundation, but it will only have lasting impact if it is used, shared, and embedded across the globe. So I encourage all of you, all of us, researchers, practitioners, advocates, partners, to take this learning forward. Use it to inform your projects. Share it with colleagues and policymakers, and ensure that it continues to influence practice long after the programme has ended. Thank you for your commitment, your collaboration, and your leadership. And thank you for ensuring that disability inclusive development remains at the heart of our shared mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kemi. What a wonderful introduction to the importance of this program. I'll now hand over to Stephen Thompson. Stephen is a fellow here at IDS in the Participation and Inclusion Social Change Cluster and has been one of the editors.
Thank you, John, and thanks everyone. It's great to see so many people here and online as well. And thanks for the kind introductions, and Kemi for the insightful opening remarks. Both of you set the bar very high, and I'll try my best to keep the same energy as I introduce this issue to you. So firstly, in terms of the editorial team, so myself, Claire, Gayatri and Brigitte, you know, it really was a team effort. And for me, it's personally been one of the highlights of my career working with them, and I'm very grateful to the editorial team, but also to the rest of the IDS support staff and Sightsavers colleagues and IDA colleagues as well, who have really made this happen. And I'm very conscious it's beginning to sound a bit like a Oscars thank you speech or something. So the final thank you I'll say is to Johannes Trimmel, who is the Inclusive Futures Programme Director, who put faith in us as an editorial team to deliver on this ambitious publication. So moving swiftly on, I'd like to just take a few moments just to introduce you to the bulletin. But before I do, I just want to say a few words about the approach we took as editors. So we had some values in mind when we started out on this editorial journey, and that kind of informed the way we went about the work. So the first was very much inclusion. So people with disabilities and organisations of people with disabilities, OPDs, were very much at the heart of the DID programme, and that was something we felt very strongly we needed to continue with the issue as well. So we worked very hard to make sure that people with disabilities and OPDs were included, both in terms of the process, but also the publication. So we've made real efforts to make the publication as accessible as possible for the greatest number of people, to make sure that everyone can access it. The second value is partnership. Again, very, very important. And this is partners both in terms of the editorial team, but also each paper was written by a team of authors. And so they were working across organisations, countries, cultures, and also time zones, which at times can be quite tricky. But when equitable partnerships are grounded in respect, you know, what's come out of it is the articles and ultimately the issue in general. And then the third value is that we wanted it to be very much evidence-based. So we wanted to go beyond just publishing a summary of what DID and Inclusive Futures and Penda had achieved. And we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to challenge the authors to think about key lessons, you know, what could be taken forward to be used as we in future programmes, future pieces of research. So that evidence base was really, really important. And so the issue in many ways, it's not just a record of what's been achieved, but it's also looking at what's going to come next. So with this framing in mind, I thought I'd just introduce to you the issue itself. So after the editorial introduction, we have a number of forewords. The first one is on accessible publishing, written by a former colleague of ours, Beth Richard, who's here. And then we had two forewords, one from the funder, FCDO, and the second one from the programme leadership team. And then in the main body of the issue, we have 8 full papers. And we're really proud to say, as John mentioned, they're written by a combination of academics, researchers, advocates, and practitioners. So a real mixture of voices and experiences there. And they also, so we recognise the DID programme is slightly confusing in that there's 2 elements. There's a research element and an implementation element. So the research element is known as the Programme for Evidence to Inform Disability Action, or PENDA, and that's managed by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And then Inclusive Futures is managed by Sightsavers and the International Disability Alliance. And so we had authors and author teams from both elements of the DID programme, which was something we were really, really pleased to celebrate. Moving swiftly on. So the first paper focuses on disability inclusive participatory methods. That's something Brigitte is going to speak to in a minute. IDS has a very rich history of working with participatory approaches and working with marginalised communities and marginalised groups, marginalised individuals. But it was really under the Inclusive Futures programme that we started to build up a significant body of research in this area. Participatory methods enable and empower people to play an active and influential role in issues that affect their lives. And so the paper explores some of these experiences that have been gained over the length of the programme. The second paper is on the very important issue of disability stigma. It remains a persistent barrier across many cultures, many different countries, and quite often it will be overlooked or under-researched, so overlooked in programming and under-researched in terms of research. And Elizabeth, who's joining us online, will give some reflections on that. The third paper is on safeguarding, very important issue, focusing on how we can reduce the risk of abuse, neglect and harm. Safeguarding, as we know, is an essential part of all development programmes, but particularly so when we're working with people with disabilities. And that's due to existing social structures, entrenched power inequalities, and it's particularly important for disability inclusive development programming. And Claire is going to speak a little bit more on that online. The fourth paper is on inclusive education, and we've got some of the authors of that paper here in the room as well, so please do speak to them afterwards if you can. And they draw on some of the evidence from inclusive futures across Bangladesh, Kenya, Tanzania, Nepal, and Nigeria. And their paper details how low-cost, scalable strategies can improve educational outcomes for children with disabilities. The fifth paper focuses on people with disabilities with high support needs who are quite often excluded. So they're a marginalised group within a marginalised group. And this is followed by an important paper on inclusive health. As we know, health is a very important development theme, again, across countries and contexts. Many health systems are still not accessible for people with disabilities. And so their paper draws on evidence from inclusive health interventions in Nigeria and makes recommendations on what is needed to support the implementation of inclusive health in mainstream programmes. And again, we have some of the authors in the room, so do seek them out afterwards if you'd like to have a chat about that. The seventh paper's on the important topic of transport. You know, transport's such a fundamental enabler. If anyone needs to get to a service, a job, a school, whatever it is, if transport isn't accessible, they're simply not going to be able to do that. So it's a real cross-cutting issue. And for that article, we draw on evidence from both Inclusive Futures and PENDA. And then the last full paper is written by the colleagues from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine on PENDA, and it focuses on impact evaluations. And then we finish the bulletin off with a final message with an afterword on the vital role of OPDs, Organisations of People with Disabilities, as the driver for change. And the message there is really people with disabilities must be included across all areas of mainstream development. and Gayatri is going to speak a bit more to that paper shortly. So I'll leave it there as an introduction, but we really hope you enjoy reading it as a publication. We really enjoyed working on it and putting it together, and we'll look forward to some more discussion in the second half of the seminar. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. That's a great overview, but please don't just listen to Stephen. Read the papers. They're really good, and a lot of depth in them. We'll move now to Elizabeth Ogutu. Elizabeth is a freelance peer researcher with a commitment and passion for work on empowering local communities. She's coming to us online, and she's based in Homa Bay, Kenya. Elizabeth, can you hear us? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
We can hear you well.
Okay. I'm Elizabeth Ogutu, just as you have been told, a peer researcher and a freelancer. I'm happy to be part of this. I'll take you through the paper. In the study we conducted about disability stigma, stigma was found to impact different lives negatively. The term stigma was not easily understood by many, but was articulated to myths, taboos, barriers, and one's own feeling. The study covered different forms of stigma, of which we have the social stigma, negative attitude from people in the society. We have the internalized stigma, which is the internal oppression that a disabled person feels. We have stigma by association. This is the negative attitude from people who are closely related to the person who is disabled. Then we have the structural stigma, the controlling system such as the law, policies, and structure of organization. Then from the research we conducted, there were areas that were identified that should be looked into keenly in the inclusive future program, or maybe any development program that may come in the future. There were gaps identified in approaches used for the study that should be worked on in any inclusive program as well, and any development program. First, we have the intentional plan for stigma reduction. There should be shared conceptualization of stigma, so the stigma reduction and an explicit outcome be intentional. This means that you involve shared understanding and a simplified view of the concerned parties, without which stigma cannot be measured. And these concerned parties can be the community, the people who have the experience, who are of living experience of the same. And also there is a root cause of stigma that should be looked into to help in understanding the role of different types of stigma and to make an effort of reducing stigma easy. More support of measurement of stigma is also needed, with the focus on what works best. Secondly, there is partnering and shared experience of people with disability. This was found to be a very important thing, and many organizations that have carried the same have been using people who have lived experience to work in areas like peer-to-peer advocacy, and conduct trainings to reach people where people were disabled, and also to help in stigma reduction. Now, when working with people who have lived experience, it's much easier because they are able to share from their experience, and also to make the people they're talking to share their side. Thank you for that. Different projects conducting inclusive future program use people with disability in their areas of training, mostly advocacy, role modeling, peer-to-peer, just like I said, support and engagement with families, and they play a control role in capacity building and feeling of self-esteem. There is a need of supporting people with disability. This was an issue that came out. There's a need of supporting organizations of persons with disability in terms of accommodation, cost, and cater for their engagement and opportunities, and also post-trainings to help with the mental health. It can also help. Then thirdly, we have the stigma reduction at multiple levels and considered power. This approach targets different types of stigma and different levels of society, working with both people with disability and people without disability. This may be through education sector, dialogue, skill building, advocacy, and to ensure successful stigma reduction. Stigma reduction study includes peer-to-peer education, just like I said, people with disability and caregivers. And this is what we are doing in the study we conducted. Actually, we were having groups of caregivers, support groups, community, dialogue, community, radios. And there was an example of Nigeria, which was using a family planning project designed activity to empower and educate young people with disability and caregivers. And then there is a need of also engaging the religious leaders. It's an issue that came up because they also have people within their congregation that they can reach through sensitization or through advocacy to help in stigma reduction. Engaging those in position of power is very important as well. Like in Kenya, the teachers, it was found that the teachers who are taking care of the children with disability were playing a major role in raising their self-esteem through training them and taking good care of them, which helped in reducing the stigma in the children. And then the fourth point is challenge ingrained form of stigma. This is the deep-seated kind of stigma, which needs a multiple approach in order to deal with it, because it is something that has stayed for long. So it needs maybe follow-up, it needs dialogue, and it needs training. It's for the stigma to be able to maybe for the person to be able to change, or for the stigma to be reduced. Then we have the working families on their children. This is maybe the caregivers, if they are reached early on with the children they are staying with, it can help and also boost their self-esteem. This one I can give an example maybe for myself. I'm visually impaired, but what helped me mostly was through how my parents reached. There's a person whom they brought that talked to me early when I was young, who was also disabled like me. So this lady encouraged me a lot. So you see, if maybe the caregivers are reached on early stages, they will be able to mentor their children, and it will help in reducing the stigma. In some cases, there is need of also dialogue. It will help deal with the ingrained stigma. Like in Nigeria, there was a radio drama conducted with informed discussion that was allowing people to give their input on how stigma can be reduced. And then tackling structural stigma is a long-term that can help in stigma reduction in the study, and local and national leaders were also included to ensure disability laws and policies are enforced. Even though more study is needed into effective ways to uphold laws that can sanction discriminatory practices to help reduce stigma. So what we've shared is just but a teaser because of time, but there is more of information in the paper, and I will encourage all of us to go through it and read so that we can get more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for those really important insights about both stigma, but also how we help educate and build awareness around it. We'll now move on to Brigitte Rohwerder, a researcher also here in the Participation, Inclusion, and Social Change group at IDS.
Hello. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the paper which was focused on disability inclusive participatory research that's in the bulletin, and explore one element that's focused on in the paper, which is participatory researchers with disabilities. So as mentioned, research, evidence, and learning were a key part of the DID program. The lack of data about people with disabilities' lived experiences has been a persistent barrier to improving their inclusion in society. And the DID program offered an opportunity to learn more about their experiences with education, health, livelihoods, and their lives more broadly, as well as about efforts to include them. As part of this focus on research, a team of researchers here at IDS, led by Mary Wickenden, together with researchers based in Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, and Nepal, conducted disability inclusive participatory research in conjunction with various partners, focused on themes of inclusive education, livelihoods, and the impact of COVID-19 on people with disabilities. Participatory research methods enable people to play an active and influential role in decisions that affect their lives. Participatory research processes value people's knowledge, and their voices and analysis shape outcomes that benefit them and others. Disability inclusive participatory research allows people with disabilities to have a say about their experiences and to be involved in processes to improve the situation. The methods and materials used when conducting disability inclusive participatory research recognize and adapt to the diversity of participants and their different support needs so that people with disabilities are meaningfully included. The paper reflects on including people with disabilities as research participants, participatory researchers with disabilities, and positionality and power. And here I'm going to focus on these by looking at the involvement of peer researchers with disabilities in research that was part of our project working on disability inclusion in pre-primary education in Kakuma and Homa Bay in Kenya. Working together with local OPDs and partners, 8 peer researchers with disabilities were recruited to gather research through focus groups with parents, teachers, and children with disabilities themselves. It was important to us that children with disabilities were also able to have a say about their experiences in the pre-primary schools, and that we did not only conduct focus groups with their parents and teachers. This approach recognizes them as experts in their own lives, who may have differing opinions from their parents and teachers. The methods used for the focus groups with the children with disabilities were adapted to be both age-appropriate and accessible. Flexible play-based activities were developed to encourage the children to speak openly about what they liked or didn't like at school and what could be improved. The peer researchers were not expected to have high research skills already. Instead, those with experience of community facilitation and awareness of inclusion and disability rights and a willingness to learn new skills were prioritized. The peer researchers received research training and then facilitated focus groups with the support of an experienced local research consultant. They were also involved in a collective analysis of the data gathered, providing an additional depth to the analysis through their lived experiences and contextual knowledge. Engaging peer researchers also proved beneficial with the children, parents, and teachers, with one peer researcher noting, "Parents were motivated seeing me, a disabled person, interviewing them," and another feeling that they were a role model. It gave people a different understanding of what children with disabilities might achieve in the future and that people with disabilities themselves had something to contribute to the topic. The peer researchers themselves also gained confidence and research skills as a result of being involved in the research process. However, the process was not without challenges, as while the team of peer researchers were diverse, they all had acquired physical or visual impairments, and no applications were received from people with other impairment types. This risks perpetuating the marginalization of certain groups, and perhaps could have been overcome with a longer and more proactive approach to recruitment to encourage people from more marginalized, from more excluded groups to apply. The peer research approach is more complex, expensive, and time-consuming than conventional methodologies. In addition, while working with peer researchers was a form of co-production, the conventional power dynamics within research still existed to an extent. Yet, working with peer researchers with disabilities contributes to bringing a shift in whose knowledge counts and generated a rich diversity of findings. Approaches to research that require delivery by experienced researchers, such as narrative interviewing around COVID-19 experiences, were also too hard to recruit suitably skilled local researchers with disabilities for. The reasons for this are partially rooted in the systemic and historic barriers to education that people with disabilities face, resulting in fewer people with disabilities becoming professional researchers, especially in low and middle income countries. To address this challenge in the longer term, more resources and skills training could be provided to ensure that researchers with disabilities, as well as OPDs, get the opportunity to be involved. In addition, over time, as access to education improves, more people with disabilities will develop research skills and careers. In conclusion, people with disabilities should be part of any research that is about them, and participatory research approaches hold great potential to contribute to their meaningful inclusion in research. We hope you will enjoy reading the paper and that it will provide useful insights for others who are already undertaking disability inclusive participatory research, as well as anyone who is planning to do so in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Brigitte, for that really clear and interesting description of what participatory research can be in this context, but also some of the real challenges you face. Excellent, thank you. We'll move now to Claire Walsh. Claire is Deputy Program Director of the Disability Inclusive Development Program based at Sightsavers. And I believe Claire is calling in today from Canada. Claire, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Just checking that you can hear me okay?
We can hear you and see you well.
Great. Okay. Well, good morning from Canada. It's a pleasure to speak to you all today. I'm going to talk about an article that I co-wrote with Lisa Morris, Amba Sekar, and Joe Dempster for the issue. And it's titled Lessons on Power and Partnership in Disability Inclusive Safeguarding. So the mandate of the DID program was to improve outcomes for people with disabilities and to evidence it, to learn from it. Sightsavers and the International Disability Alliance co-led the program, and that partnership set the scene. The program would look to achieve its aim via partnership between international non-governmental organizations, or INGOs, and organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs. The challenge was to ensure the meaningful engagement of OPDs and people with disabilities into the design, implementation, and evaluation of projects. So keeping that challenge in mind, let me introduce another one. So FCDO launched their enhanced safeguarding standards in March 2018. I'm taking you guys back a bit now, 5 months before the DID program started, and the same year as the first Oxfam scandal hit. So before March 2018, there were no standalone safeguarding standards for UK-funded development programming. They were integrated into the due diligence process. So in response to the FCDO having these new enhanced safeguarding standards, the program mimicked that and developed a standalone safeguarding approach. So safeguarding acts to prevent people from experiencing abuse, neglect, and harm. So for me, having a standalone safeguarding approach was a new way of working. So I think sitting here in 2026, I would think the average NGO worker would be quite informed about safeguarding. It's often part of an employee's induction, and some organizations even consider it as part of their core programming. But 8 years ago, I think it was more uneven, and certainly in my case, I wasn't very familiar with safeguarding apart from kind of the basic compliance. So luckily, I wasn't in charge of safeguarding completely. I had a counterpart, Joe Dempster, who is also one of the co-authors of this paper, and she's a very experienced safeguarding practitioner. So together, Joe and I worked with consortium partners to develop and implement an inclusive safeguarding approach and to learn from it. So I'm just going to pause to recognize our consortium partners right now. And 8 years on the program, I still have not memorized everyone, and I'm afraid of missing someone. So I'm reading through the names. ADD, BRAC, BBC Media Action, Humanity and Inclusion, the International Disability Alliance, the Institute of Development Studies, Light for the World, Social Development Direct, Sightsavers, and Sense International. So when I talk about the program and the consortium, it's really these actors who are the NGO partners, save the International Disability Alliance. So inclusive safeguarding concerns the design, implementation, and strengthening of safeguarding systems to involve all people, including people with disabilities. And I will note that definition comes from two sources in 2021 and 2022. So in 2018, we did not really in the literature have an active definition of that. So why is inclusive safeguarding important? First, people with disabilities are more vulnerable to abuse than people without disabilities. They also face significant barriers to accessing justice. If you are working with people with disabilities, you need to understand how to design and run projects safely. Second, people with disabilities and their representative organizations are experts in their own lives, as Brigitte just also referenced. And OPDs are member-based organizations that are led, directed, and governed by people with disabilities. They are often the first point of contact for people with disabilities, especially in times of crisis, and work to identify measures of redressal. So they are acutely aware of the risks experienced by people with disabilities and the barriers to accessing health and justice. So if INGOs don't facilitate the meaningful participation of the people we want to keep safe and their representative organizations, then our approaches will not consider their reasonable accommodation needs or be contextually relevant, opening up and exposing people to harm. Third, safeguarding looks to protect project participants and employees of our NGOs and OPD partners from abuse, neglect, and harm. The program actually provided organizational capacity strengthening to all our partners on safeguarding. And a note on this last point. All OPDs in the DID program were downstream partners of INGOs and did not hold the contractual responsibility for safeguarding. And a key reason for this is that OPDs could not meet the financial terms of the donor contract, which required partners to pre-finance and claim monthly. So OPDs are historically under-resourced, and one impact of this is limited organizational, financial, and human capacity to meet donor requirements. And this turns into a barrier to funding and perpetuates under-resourcing and limits opportunities. So this article presents examples of how INGOs and OPDs work together to implement inclusive safeguarding, and then critically examines the implementation experience to identify successes and challenges in forming equitable, proportional relationships between INGOs and OPDs. And we argue that partnerships can be a powerful tool to challenge hierarchies and the status quo in international development, and that partnerships that are collaborative, learning focused, and mutually beneficial have the potential to produce effective and sustainable outcomes. So we hope our learning can support improvements in partnerships in future programming. Okay, so some of the key findings of the paper. So what went well? So INGOs and OPDs broadly were successful in partnering to design and implement disability inclusive safeguarding. INGOs provided OPDs with capacity strengthening, technical support on developing their safeguarding systems, peer support. They shared resources. So a lot of safeguarding capacity is having the right policies in place, the right reporting mechanisms, and they facilitated the meaningful participation of OPDs throughout the project cycle by agreeing clear roles and responsibilities. And notably, the OPDs took on roles that recognized their position in the local communities. There were also examples of changing practice in response to feedback from OPDs and people with disabilities, and one example stands out. So the program responded to feedback on community social protection cases, which typically do not fall under donor safeguarding requirements. And we ultimately devolved decision-making on how to address them to our project partners and provided flexibility to reallocate technical and financial resources. So the lesson learned here is that INGOs need to look for opportunities to make their partnerships with OPDs mutually beneficial. In this case, OPDs were working within the communities and providing feedback. They wanted some flexibility to support community social protection cases that fell out of scope. Even if this means that the program does more than required. When it comes to challenges, we identified a few, and I'm going to just highlight two here, but there are more in the paper. Ultimately, as I said, INGOs were accountable for donor safeguarding requirements, and they controlled the safeguarding budget. So this contributed to a missed opportunity to strengthen OPD capacity in some critical safeguarding skill sets, such as case management and investigation. So this is a tricky one, but the paper says the lesson here is that INGOs must be the one to challenge the status quo of international development and work to ensure that OPDs receive kind of the comprehensive capacity strengthening activities that target skills and experience that will address this historical under-resourcing and its impacts so they can secure future funding as well as be able to effectively uphold the systems that are being created in their community that they've contributed to building. Another challenge is that OPD and INGO workers have different access to psychosocial support, and psychosocial support is quite key to employees that work on development projects and engage in safeguarding cases. It can be quite difficult for people. And this really underscores the need of NGOs to consider acts of mutual aid as a demonstration of solidarity with OPDs. So there is an opportunity here for INGOs, again, to go outside maybe what's required, think beyond program delivery priorities, and include mental health support to OPD workers who are on the front line of safeguarding work, often working beside the INGO workers, and they also need to be protected from burnout so they can continue to contribute to the disability movement. So in conclusion, the DID program's commitment to learn and evidence how it worked to deliver disability inclusive safeguarding provides INGOs in the international development sector with the opportunity to improve their side of the partnership with OPDs in future programming. I've I've been emphasizing what INGOs can do because I think often, a lot of what I hear is what OPDs can do to improve partnership and working on development projects. So OPDs do need funding, equitable partnerships, capacity strengthening, and contextually relevant activities to target stigma and discrimination and to establish a sustainable safeguarding culture. So in future programs, INGOs must be proactive and they must go beyond compliance when it comes to safeguarding and look at how they can invest in approaches that will build mutually beneficial relationships with OPDs. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very, very much, Claire. I can remember very clearly when those safeguarding guidelines came into play, and to now have so much knowledge about how the risk and the opportunities with them. It's very, very helpful and interesting. Finally, our last speaker is Gayatri Sekar. Gayatri is a senior officer on learning, community engagement at IDA, the International Disability Alliance. And Gayatri, I believe you're joining us today from India. Over to you.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, John.
We can hear you well, see you well.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and hi to everyone who's joining from different time zones. Today, we've talked about disability inclusive development, and members on this esteemed panel have reflected on the work done during the Inclusive Futures program. We've talked about partnerships. Claire talked about the value of partnerships, strengthening the system. Elizabeth talked about stigma, which is an intrinsic barrier to progress. And we've also talked about participatory methods for research, and I hope that particularly resonated with those who are connected with us today from the Institute of Development Studies. I wanted to bring our attention to a key player that was discussed in today's discussions. It was mentioned by almost all of the co-editors of this bulletin, organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs as they are called. And I think in some places they're called DPOs. Let me start by sharing some information, and if it's information you already have, bear with me for a minute. Because not everyone in this room works on disability every day. But for those of us who do work on disability every day, we do it on the basis of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD. The CRPD is a human rights convention, and it's an international development tool, and it is at the heart of the disability rights movement. It functions as a guide with which you can harmonize national laws. Its principles can be used to ensure that policies, programs, and projects are disability inclusive. 2026 is the 20th year of the CRPD, and we've had incredible years of advocacy across the world that shape how we build disability inclusion into every aspect of life. The Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities defined OPDs as organizations that are led, directed, and governed by persons with disabilities. OPDs are membership-based organizations. And it's important to understand the distinction because OPDs are representative bodies and they're accountable to their members, to their constituencies. OPDs are not service providers. They are not charities that are working on behalf of persons with disabilities. They are collective bodies, and they are the platform through which persons with disabilities organize, advocate, and participate in public decision-making. When we say OPDs, they can take different forms. Some represent specific groups of persons with disabilities, while others work across disability communities. And in some countries, umbrella organizations bring together multiple OPDs to coordinate advocacy and represent the broader movement. There are also organizations led by specific groups, such as women with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities, or self-advocacy organizations. Under the CRPD, all of these OPDs are recognized as independent actors in public life, and they carry a representative mandate. A key global platform through which OPDs come together is the International Disability Alliance, or IDA, where I work. IDA is a global network of organizations of persons with disabilities. Its role is to support the disability movement, to influence international development and human rights processes, strengthen OPDs, and ensure that the voices of persons with disabilities shape global policy discussions. Through research, advocacy, and partnerships with development actors, IDA works to ensure that the principles of the CRPD are translated into practice across programs. IDA was a partner in the Inclusive Futures DID program in the consortium, and as Claire mentioned during her intervention. So coming back to OPDs, OPDs bring something that no external actor can replicate. And this is really because OPDs have direct relationships and gather continuous feedback from their members. So this adds to the fact that they have accountability to the members, and it is this accountability that strengthens development effectiveness. It makes programs smarter and have more sustainable impact. And therefore, OPD participation is mandatory for program effectiveness. And I think the papers that we've looked at so far have communicated this to us effectively. But my reflection today is not to argue for more OPD participation. Today, I'm trying to think about a different, maybe even a harder question. And the question is, have we restructured development systems so that OPDs can shape decisions from the beginning, including budgets, priorities, and accountability mechanisms? In the afterword of this bulletin, my co-author Rijal Siddiqui and I identified some crucial aspects of structural tension in trying to answer this question. The first thing we reflected on was that OPDs are often under-resourced, another thing that Claire talked about. Many OPDs are invited into processes without predictable financing. Some are engaged as implementers but are not involved in the design. Some face barriers accessing direct funding because systems assume that they have limited capacity, and then that assumption becomes self-fulfilling, and it creates sort of a vicious cycle. Limited resources restricting participation, limited participation reinforcing perceptions of limited capacity. The Inclusive Futures DID program demonstrated what happens when you make OPD leadership the cornerstone of your development work. And it did this by mandating engagement plans, embedding OPD participation into the design, and even in the reporting structure. Additionally, it invested in capacity and technical expertise. It experimented with models like fiscal sponsorship to address operational barriers. The experience of DID, therefore, offers important lessons, and they are beyond the program itself, and I think that's clear from all of the speakers today. But the one that I'm talking about is that it shows OPD leadership does not just happen automatically, and it requires deliberate structures like dedicated resources and having good communication of clear expectations across the work that we are going to do together. And the question now is whether these lessons will inform broader development systems. And it's particularly consequential now because we know that priorities and funding models are beginning to shift. It is common news to us all that we are in a period of massively shrinking development budgets At the same time, there is growing enthusiasm for mainstreaming disability across sectors. And mainstreaming disability inclusion across development programs has great potential. It can move disability out of isolated projects and integrate it into sectors. And this is great. But disability-focused programs have historically been the spaces where expertise, partnerships, and dedicated funding have been built. And these targeted programs have enabled the conditions for OPDs to participate meaningfully, develop organization capacity, and influence policy discussion. The DID program is a huge example of this. If targeted investments are reduced in the name of mainstreaming, without ensuring that disability expertise and OPD leadership are embedded within mainstream systems, important progress that we've done over 20 years can be lost. When inclusion is treated sort of like a general principle across, mainstream development rather than a focused and funded, monitored commitment, it can easily be overlooked. Programs may reference disability in their language, but fail to involve OPDs in the design, in budgeting, decision-making, accountability. Basically, we may run the risk that disability inclusive development becomes like everyone's responsibility, but no one's priority. And mainstreaming without resourcing representative bodies is an issue also of who holds power in development processes. It is about whether our partnerships reflect the communities that we want to and claim to serve. If we take seriously the idea of leaving no one behind, then representative leadership cannot be at the margins of development. The afterword on this bulletin is called Nothing Without Us, derived from the core principle of the CRPD, which is nothing about us without us. And if the idea of nothing without us should continue to shape how we finance, plan, implement, monitor, evaluate development work across sectors, there has to be a shift from invitation to shared authority. And that, I think, is the real challenge before us. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all my co-editors.
Gayatri, thank you very, very much. I've worked a lot on issues of participation over the years, and your lessons here about participation oftentimes being invited into somebody else's place and space without resources and without control over or say so in the overall agenda, upstream as well as downstream. And mainstreaming without power and control, shift of resources, the lessons there. I'm really struck throughout these presentations that the words that we've used, common buzzwords in development, inclusion, partnership, power, accountability, mainstreaming. You've given us such rich cases of what these words actually mean in practice, what they look like when they're really working, but also the challenges of misuse and abuse of this language of development. So I take away from this that huge lessons from this bulletin and this program, not on disability alone, but on these broader concepts that are integral to our work and our commitment for inclusive development that's just power around the world. So thank you very, very much for all the speakers. Thank you for staying to time. Thank you to our interpreters, who I should have thanked earlier. And let's please open it up for any questions or comments. We've got about 20 minutes for feedback, questions, and comments. We'll start with if there's any in the room. And those of you online, if you haven't, Gary can share with us questions online as well. Please, my colleague there. If you can speak to the microphone so people can hear you online.
Okay, my name is My name is Michael Fade from the School of Global Studies here in Sussex. So 2 observations that I want to talk about is the fact that how do we ensure that international NGOs who support local NGOs to implement programs ensure that such programs are disability inclusive. And I'm speaking about that from the Nigerian perspective because I focus on gender-based violence against women with disabilities. And I see that a lot of work is being done, but a lot of those works on ground are not inclusive of women with disabilities. And that's a major barrier to violence against women. And then the second one, we talked about safeguarding as well. And I noticed that particularly in Nigeria, a lot of work that is being done, especially by maybe vocational training centers and schools where you have caregivers who look after persons with disabilities. They don't actually, there is really no safeguard in what they do because the general belief is that they are doing a charitable job. So government does not actually focus on them. And we have issues where you have caregivers who molest children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, and nothing is being done. It's a lived experience. So how do we ensure that maybe we work with government and other stakeholders to ensure that we have safeguard frameworks that can be implementable and monitored? Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I think we'll do is take several questions and give any of the speakers a chance to comment briefly, and at some time we'll have another round. So please, speakers, keep a list of comments that you want to, questions you want to help us. Anyone else in the room here at the moment? Gary, do we have 2 questions from online?
Yes, question 1. Was there much research including people with communication and non-verbal communication barriers, especially for those who are deaf, blind, autistic, language disorders, etc.? Are these cohorts are often left out of inclusive research and development agendas?
What was the last one again? Is that part of the second question? Or
that's the same question. Yeah. And there's another question. How do you see the position of OPD wings representing a person with an intellectual disability, which in most cases are led by parents and caregivers? Should they be identified as specific OPD or independent actors?
Okay. Great, thank you. Anything else? So I'll just give a chance for any of the speakers who want to respond to this question about, first question about how do we ensure that INGOs are really being inclusive on the ground? How do you ensure that safeguarding is really working on the ground in places like Nigeria? Oftentimes a charity is considered, you don't question what a charity is doing, it's charitable. And how do you get beyond that? Questions here about which audience, which peoples have you really researched here? People with nonverbal communication barriers, intellectual disabilities, etc. So who would like to speak to any of these questions? Stephen, can I let you kick off?
Thanks, John. Yeah, maybe I'll take the first one about how do we ensure local NGOs are doing disability inclusive development work. So I suppose the response to that really is if you're doing development work and it involves people and you're not considering disability, then you're not being inclusive. So really, it doesn't matter what the theme of your NGO is, whether it's looking at education, whether it's looking at health, whatever the theme is, if we're not thinking about people with disabilities, then we're just not being inclusive enough. How we actually make that happen in practice is a slightly harder question. Of course, different organisations have different agendas, but I do think, one of the key learnings I've taken away from Inclusive Futures and the bigger DID programme is working in partnership is really, really key to this. There is expertise out there is guidance out there, and a lot of it is having that awareness to work with people and to recognise that we can all improve in terms of our inclusive behaviour. And I think that will go a long way towards making disability more inclusive.
Thank you.
I can take the second one from Michael.
Okay, please.
So Michael was talking about safeguarding partnerships with governments and in schools. So I would just like to highlight how our partners, especially when we're talking about inclusive education, safeguarding was a pillar in their program approach. So working closely with governments to operationalize their safeguarding structures in school was a priority. And I think the technical support given by our consortium partners and OPD partners to teachers, on case management. They provided peer support to those teachers when they would also receive cases to help them work through it. Because a lot of governments now do have safeguarding policies in place. It's just activating it, making it a reality, building that technical competency within a school, and also linking the school to the local services, so to the police, to healthcare, to protective services. So that was something that I thought the program did quite well through our partners.
Great. Thank you. How about Elizabeth or Gayatri? Either of you online want to pick up on any of these? Elizabeth, I'm thinking about the relationship of stigma and intellectual disability. I'm sure that's a huge issue. Or other comments? May have lost Elizabeth there. Gayatri, how about this question about what experience can you or advice can you give about this question of INGO programs and making sure they really are being serious about inclusion?
Thanks, John. I would like to address the second part of the first question as well, which is around representative organizations that are led by parents and caregivers, especially around persons with intellectual disabilities. Within the purview of the convention and the general comments of the convention, these are recognized as OPDs, and there is a great distinction between organizations for and of persons with disabilities within general comment 7 of the CRPD, and I highly recommend it to anyone who would like to understand all the nuanced differences of what OPDs can and cannot be. I'm going to partner with Claire to answer Karina's question on going forward, what are the strategies to shift power to Global South OPDs from INGOs. The main and important strategy would be to ensure that OPDs are involved in the design just from the get-go of any programming work that is being done, especially by INGOs. I will defer to Claire to speak about fiscal sponsorship and capacity building during partnerships to ensure that this happens. But there are also other aspects within this, such as the budgeting and provision of reasonable accommodation in order to ensure that there is participation and that power structures within participation are reduced, if not nullified, by making sure that barriers to participation are removed. Again, there is a great paper in the bulletin about this for you to read. But Claire, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Inclusive Futures website is a good starting point. We have a lot of practical resources for INGOs who want to start their inclusion journey, including 2 ones I would flag. One on reasonable accommodation, which has been noted but might not be like a commonly known term, is that INGOs need to include organizations with people with disabilities at the beginning of their planning to understand how to budget for their accommodation needs. So that would be interpreters, that would be personal assistants, that may be looking at different hotels to ensure accessibility needs and perhaps having a little bit of budget leeway for not going with the cheapest option, but maybe the most accessible option of hotel. That being said, a lot of hotels are accessible. Budgeting for inclusion from the beginning allows the program to have flexibility for participation, which is very key and fundamental. That would be kind of where I would start. And I'll leave that open to others.
Great, thank you. Stephen, finally, can you say something about the other question about special needs? Sure.
Yeah, so thanks. I'm really glad the question came up around people with severe or multiple impairments and perhaps communication challenges as well. So one of the papers in the bulletin focuses on this group, which is a hard group to define, but the people who authored that paper described this group as people with disabilities with high support needs, and so there was a few of the partners within Inclusive Futures, so Sense, for example, focuses explicitly on particularly marginalised people with disabilities. And so that paper is quite illuminating, both in its approach, but it's really good to see it recognised that it's not just a case of everyone with disabilities having the same experience, and there is differing experience in terms of accessing policies, projects, services, practice, whatever it is. And the paper really highlights that strengthening inclusion of people with disabilities with high support needs, it requires not only the kind of practical knowledge, but also the systemic change to funding practices, as Claire mentioned, and project design as well. So it's really great to see that question being asked, because it is a pressing an important issue within the broader question of disability inclusive development.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions in the audience here? Please, and introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. My name is Alex and I'm a student here. My question is around bodies, national bodies that coordinate disability programming and their role in creating real partnerships between INGOs and OPDs. How do we ensure that these bodies do not somehow become barriers to promoting real partnerships between INGOs and OPDs? In Zambia, for example, where I come from, we've got a national agency that represents government in promoting disability programming. But then we also have ZAFOD, the Zambia Federation of Organizations for Persons with Disabilities, which is a private federation body that coordinates OPDs. So OPDs register through ZAFOD, and ZAFOD somehow links some of the OPDs to international organizations. And I feel they're doing a great job, but sometimes that can become a barrier because, number one, ZAFOD, as they are a federation, they're also actively looking for funding to directly implement programs themselves. And somehow when they bring OPDs to implement programs or to partner with international organizations, it would be NGOs that are either in the capital that are close to them, and other OPDs in rural communities, for example, may be disadvantaged. So how do we ensure that these bodies do not become barriers to partnerships between INGOs and OPDs that are on the ground?
Great, thanks, Alex. Very interesting example. Gayatri, do you want to take a shot at that one? The role of national organizations, you mean national governance boards, right? Yeah. And ensure.
Is ZAFOD the umbrella body of OPDs in
Yeah.
Zambia?
So my understanding is that ZAFOD is the national umbrella OPD for Zambia. Yeah. Again, I'll partner with Claire, and Claire can start.
Oh, I can start. Okay, Gayatri. Well, I don't know if I want to comment on the relationship between umbrella bodies and local OPDs. I think that is probably something for Gayatri to tackle. But I think, Alex, one of the points you have here is introduce government. So we did focus on INGOs and OPDs in our paper. And I think one of the discussions Karina said, it is important that INGOs take that responsibility in the relationship. But governments are the third partner we didn't talk about in the paper, and they are very critical. And I would not see them as barriers. I think that we worked very effectively with government. They're critical partners for sustainability. So I think one of the approaches the program took was really understanding the learning and evidence needs of our government partners. What did they need to know about disability inclusion in order to implement some of the policies that they already have in place? And then as an INGO, we can use our position to link OPDs more directly with INGOs and support a new partnership. So in Nigeria, we worked through the Disability Commission, I think in Kaduna State. Apologies, it could have been Kogi. And there was a Disability Commission, and we worked with our OPD partners to get them to work within that government commission, and over time stepped back from that relationship. And that was kind of a sustainable structure that we were able to facilitate starting up and continuing with OPDs leading that. So I think that's one example of how INGOs can work to build those relationships. Gayatri, I pass back to you for the trickier question, maybe?
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Claire. Again, I don't know if I'm qualified to, or if this is the forum for me to comment on the relationship between government bodies and OPDs. However, what we can talk about is the aspects of building programs that will ensure that OPDs are part of the work or are leading the work even. The first thing, of course, is mandating participation, mandating leadership, mandating design leadership from OPDs, and building partnerships directly with OPDs. The second thing is ensuring that in the design of programs, including in the design of budgets, there is enough flexibility and leeway to ensure the provision of reasonable accommodation. There was a question in the chat, I think from Kiribati, from Teto Amatoa, who, about is the cost of a sign language interpreter a barrier for participation of deaf persons? And the truth is that kind of barrier is what we can overcome if we budget with flexibility to ensure that the right people are participating in the programs and in the structures that we are developing. And so certainly that is my response. I hope that's okay. Thanks, Alex, for your question.
Thanks very much, Gayatri. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but great answer. Can we just, we'll have one more comment or question, and then we'll wrap it up after that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mary Wickenden. I'm a disability researcher at IDS. I was really pleased to hear the question about people with the most excluded types of impairments. And I think I would just want to wave a flag for organisations like Inclusion International. So SENSE are important, and so are Inclusion International, because of course parents can be OPDs who are parents of children are an important group, but also these days we need to recognise that people with intellectual disabilities themselves or complex communication needs can advocate for themselves if they're given the right amounts of support. And Inclusion International are completely fantastic at encouraging that and making sure that people with intellectual disabilities themselves can speak up if they're given the right kinds of support. So I think in terms of reasonable accommodation, there are some types of accommodations that are not as obvious, like more time at a meeting or providing visual communication needs, or other types of sign language apart from sign language for the deaf. So we need to think very broadly about the types of support that need to be provided for these most marginalised groups.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mary, and a big shout out for Inclusion International. So thanks very, very much to the audience. Thanks to the speakers. You were easy to manage, very much on time, but really insightful, as I said before, I thought, papers. And may I commend you all to please share and advertise and let people know about this bulletin. It's now all online, article by article, or the full report. We get a lot of visits to our bulletin website, 800,000 visits last year. And I'm sure the numbers are going to go up as word gets around about this bulletin also. I also wanted, just as we bring an end to this meeting, I'd say a big thanks actually to another person in the room, to Mary Wickington, who has been a real pioneer here at IDS for the last few years, helping us to build our disability research program. And though she wasn't an author of one of these papers directly, she's been very much, it's her support that's helped build the resources and build the direction for our work. So thank you, Mary, for that. And thanks everyone for coming.